everyone. Welcome to Cash Up, a weekly show where we converse with amazing folks in DFIR. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Ryan Benson. Ryan Benson is an incredible part of our DFIR community, with 13 years' experience in digital forensics and incident response. He may be best known for the daily nuggets he shares with the hashtag #DailyDFIR each day. It's actually how I know what the Julian date today is. It's 3:01. Shares those on Twitter, and he also has two other really popular projects, Hindsight, an open source parser for Chrome browser forensics, and Unfurl, an incredible tool for breaking down URLs. Ryan is currently a security engineer at Google. Prior to his work there, he worked as a senior threat researcher for Exabeam. He's also worked in a variety of incident response consultancy and corporate forensics roles across his career, including for Strauss Freeburg, Mandiant, and Kaiser Permanente. Ryan earned his Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering from the University of the Pacific and his Master of Science in Digital Forensics from the University of Central Florida. He's also earned several certifications, including the GIAC Advanced Smartphone Forensics, GASF, the GIAC Certified Forensic Analyst, GCFA, and the GIAC Certified Incident Handler, GCIH. Ryan regularly shares his work at presentations such as the SANS DFIR Summit, where he often shows his newest tools and techniques, as well as OSDFCon, ISC Squared, and more. You can find everything from Ryan on his blog, dfir.blog. He has the best URL. As well as additional research like his tinkering with TikTok timestamps, also available peer-reviewed on DFIR Review, and his Google search parameter research he always seems to be discussing. Ryan is just awesome, one of my favorite people to grab a tea or coffee or lunch with and just sit and talk about forensics and life. And with that, hi, Ryan.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks. That was quite the introduction.
Well, you're quite the person. The work that you share with the community really does help others in their investigations, especially, you are known as the go-to person for browser forensics, specifically Google browser forensics, but everything not just from what you parse from browsers like Chrome to everything you've figured out in terms of Google search queries to everything you do in terms of looking at other URLs, like what you've done with the TikTok timestamps and showing how they're the same as the way Twitter does their timestamps and the encoding. Oh, it's just so cool. And, I was geeking over that with students last night, in that most recent post with taking those most significant bits and converting them. And it's just fun. So if you guys want to read a fun, nerdy post, check out the Tinkering with TikTok timestamps and how much you can learn from those URLs. I think it's so cool. I thought it was cool that they still work if they're private. So, anyway, I get excited about things. So it's so great to have you on. And I usually like to start with people sharing how they got to this. You share all these projects. You're now working at Google, which is incredible considering you've been writing parsers for Google stuff way before then. So what was your path here?
So I grew up always, being interested in computers. It's probably pretty common with a lot of people in our field. And then I went to school for computer engineering. So the college I chose was University of the Pacific, like you mentioned. And their undergrad for computer engineering was 5 years for all their engineering programs, including computer engineering. It was 5 years instead of 4 because they make you do a year of internships. Nice. I thought that was really attractive because, like, the way they pitched it and really resonated with me is that when you actually go looking for a job, you have a year of experience under your belt. You might have an in with those companies you interned with. It just seemed like a really good way to make sure you kind of went from college to actually having a job. So that's why I went there. And so I really didn't know what I wanted to do with computers, but learning about them was a good first step. And that whole internship thing, since it's a structured part of all the engineering majors, the school did a really good job of bringing in a lot of companies and helping you interview and doing like mock interviews and all that kind of stuff. Instead of bringing all the big tech companies to interview with things, but they brought in smaller companies too, like more local companies. And one of the local companies was this 4-person doing this thing called digital forensics as like consultants. And I had no idea what it was, but I kind of like looked at the company like, oh, you do investigations, like detective stuff with computers? Like, okay, I'll interview with them. And that went really well, like the interview. I ended up working for them for 6 months for my first internship and learned a lot, doing the kind of entry level, intern level forensic stuff from 10, 11 years, 12 years, a long time ago. Which is mostly going on site to places and, sitting there babysitting computers while they image.
I remember those days. But
that was like my first exposure to Ncase and other tools kind of like that. So I learned a lot there. It was really great. place to learn and get, because again, there were 4 people there, including me and the whole company. So like I got to do a lot of things. Like, it was a very
hands-on. You weren't getting coffee. You were really hands-on doing work.
Yes. Yeah. So that was a really great experience, and that kind of cemented me saying, okay, now I know what I want to do with computers. And so then I went back to school. My second internship, I worked for the FBI in their regional computer forensic lab in Menlo Park. So that was also really cool, doing intern type stuff, but instead of for a small company, for the FBI. So again, doing a lot of like evidence procedures, but like it's the FBI. So you have this crazy lab and all this system, and like you're heat shrinking like evidence and things, and you're going on, like most people that work there it was like the RCFLs, at least that one was, it's like a mixture of full-time FBI, and then they rotate in local law enforcement to teach them about forensics. And so they're all like used to doing cop stuff like search warrants. And they're like, oh, you want to go? And they're like, oh, no, I don't want to go. Like they're all bored with it. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll go. That sounds like fun. Go on search warrants and like collect evidence and stuff. And so that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot there. That was also interesting because it was like an 8 or 10 week internship. Oh. But I needed to have a clearance. It's like a summer thing, but I need to have a clearance. And so like for the 8 months before the internship, they're doing like clearance stuff, like interviewing like my friends at college and parents and stuff. And that was quite the experience too. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
I've got to tell you, that's really cool, because between both your internships, you got to see both the consultancy side of the house and corporate investigations and the law enforcement side of the house. And I must say, I think you're the only person I've met who's had that experience in their internships to get to see both sides. So that's really an awesome run you had there.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it kind of continued through the rest of my career so far. So yeah, after FBI, I went back and finish my degree, and I was ready to go back and work for them. Like I wanted to go do cyber FBI stuff, but they told me you needed a couple of years actual work experience first, which I guess fine. Then I went to the corporate side, and then I don't think I've ever kind of regretted that now. But yes, I went to work for a healthcare organization. They were standing up their SOC. So I was the first person in their SOC, but also because of that, I did a lot of stuff with their incident response team, which is different than I would consider an incident response team now, kind of in my career. But a lot of it was like looking at like, what we call commodity malware kind of things, looking at like HR driven investigations. Like, is this person doing something they shouldn't be on their computer, and all those kind of things. So, but that was also my first kind of experience with NCase Enterprise. So I was kind of using a tool to poke around and stuff and connect. And so that was a really cool learning experience from there. So this was early or 2000, I don't know, a long time ago. And NCase Enterprise did pull back all this stuff. You can pull back all different artifacts. And I was building end scripts and things like that. But it supported, like the most popular browsers at the time, Internet Explorer and Firefox. But there's this new thing that people were using called Chrome. And it didn't support that, I know. And so I decided I'd work on some scripts to maybe parse this Chrome thing. And so that worked out pretty well. But with all these,
luckily you picked one that took off.
Exactly. Yeah. So the like all these internal investigations, like I try and build, like my customers were a lot of like HR people or the managers. And so basically I would do a lot of forensic stuff and try and translate it into a spreadsheet with pretty colors and things like that to like help them understand what was going on, to basically have them really understand the findings. So that was also, I think, been a valuable experience for the rest of my career, trying to make sure that people understand kind of what's going on. So kind of like you were saying, like I had this experience from like a small consultancy, the federal government, kind of the FBI as an intern, and then working for corporate internal investigations. From there, I went over to Mandiant. So that's going from corporate investigations to Mandiant was at the time pretty much all like APT IR focused.
Yeah.
And so they're standing up something called, I think they call it managed defense now. It's called something different when I worked there, but it was kind of like their version of the SOC, where it was, you'd monitor all the different companies that they had subscriptions for, and use all their intelligence and look for APT kind of stuff, not the commodity type malware things. And so I learned a lot about that facet of DFIR. Again, very different, very, very neat, and met a lot of really cool people, and worked. That was a really fun experience too. Yeah, that was a really great place. And then they got bought by FireEye, and things changed for our office for a bit. And so a lot of the people I worked there with, we all kind of left and went different places. I went to Strauss Freeburg after that. So that was a consulting place. And again, this is pivoting. I'm still in DFIR, but it's a whole another different facet. So they do a lot of consulting. They do the whole gamut of things, but in the Bay Area, we did a lot of like legal case consulting, right? Like forensics.
Right.
And it's the Bay Area, so a lot of it is like somebody left this company and started a startup doing the same thing their company did. So we're going to sue them and see if they took stuff. So there's a lot of those kind of IP theft investigations. So that was another cool facet to work at. I got to testify in court with that. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Again, it's learning, again, the same kind of skills, but in a slightly different way. And from that, I got a little burned out on just the consulting life. I know a lot of people like traveling and talking to people and doing kinds of stuff, and that's not really me. I've learned. And so I also thought for a long time I wanted to start my own company doing the small consultancy thing, kind of like my first internship. But I've kind of evolved from that thinking since then. And then I kind of took a different path. I was tired of the consulting, so I went to work for this company called Exabeam. So they were startup life before, so that was interesting. And they're a threat. Sorry,
no, it's okay.
So yeah, they're a research company, or sorry, they're not a research company. I worked for threat research for them. They sold at the time it was basically UBA or add-ons for a SEM. So basically it was like you find the person or the thing that's not acting like it normally does.
Anomaly detection type.
Yeah. So basically it's like, oh, that sounds a lot like DFIR, like investigations. You're mostly looking for the thing that doesn't belong or doesn't act like it normally does, whether that's the person or like, the thing in the startup location or whatever it is. That really resonated with me also. And so me and my boss were the research team there. That was another very interesting perspective to see the DFIR field from like a product company. Like that was a new experience for me, right? I was the only like forensics person there. Most people there were sales or software engineers or product managers or UI designers or things like that. So
I know what that feels like. Although we have lots of examiners here now, but I do know what that feels like. It's different.
You have a deep experience in like things about the programs that I wouldn't have thought of typically. So learning from them is also really neat. So I did that for a few years and I learned a lot there, again, on different facets of it. And then I got approached by Google a couple times before, but this time after a conference, they talked to me again. And I'm like, all right, now's the right time for this. And so I went over to work for them where I'm currently now. And that was, I think Exabeam was, because I was burnt out on consulting. And I feel like after a few years, it was a bit of an overcorrection because it was like all research. It was almost purely like no ops, very little kind of things like that. And so Google is my job. I love my job now. It's a great balance because we do like on-call rotations. And so we work on incidents, but the goal is incidents around 40% of your time. And then like project work or research, which is with Google for our team, a lot of that's open source tools is 40% of your time. And then typically Google, you get 20%, do whatever you want. But most people end up using that for project work too, because that's like the coding stuff that people like. So then now I get to do a foot in the research world, a foot in the ops world. So I still kind of know what's going on. And Google, like they make their money from things besides forensics, right? And they really like open source. So I can do all my open source work, like it's all approved. I can do it as part of my job. Like before, all my hindsight stuff
was all on your own time.
Yeah, I was very careful to do it on my own time, on my own systems, to make sure there wasn't any of that, IP stuff going on. So now it's part of my job, which is amazing. So
I love that. That is
a lot of jobs for someone that hasn't been here that long, but
but what's really, really great is that your experience touches on all of the different facets of our field. So like your understanding of the field is a more holistic image than I think what many people get, because I feel like a lot of people there are people who definitely move from like law enforcement, they retire and they go into consultancy, or they go and work in corporate IR or HR, IP theft or whatnot. People do move, but it's usually after spending a long time in one sector, and people are dedicated to that one sector. What's great is you've had, especially with those internships in the beginning, it's almost like you took a taste test of every type of role in DFIR, and then you were able at the end of the tasting to say what you preferred, and you had already built up a catalog that of your work that actually fit extremely well with what you were doing, and you already knew what you wanted. You wanted that balance of doing operational work and research, and it sounds like you've found the perfect role for you. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I like it. I think Yeah.
I think you have one of the coolest paths in that you were able to see everything on the buffet. I don't think everybody gets that exposure. So that's really, really cool. So you mentioned that at Google you get this time to work on these open source projects. Can you share maybe some of those things that you're working on now?
Well, I guess, yeah, I could start with the one I kind of alluded to, Hindsight, right? So that's the Chrome thing that I started a long time ago, and I've kind of kept with. So it parses, Chrome artifacts or web browser artifacts. It's been on my roadmap for probably 6, 7, 8 years now to make it do more than Chrome, and that's becoming easier and easier as more browsers kind of start to look like Chrome behind the scenes. So
as more browsers just use Chromium, like, there's so many browsers just using Chromium. So
yeah, so I work on that a lot. I've put a lot of, I think my experience kind of from the healthcare working at like for HR investigations, like I try to make the default output for a long time from Hindsight is a spreadsheet, right? And most people know how to use a spreadsheet. There's very little learning curve on how to like do filtering and searching and things like that. And in Hindsight, the output uses like, colors to differentiate kinds of artifacts, and it kind of flows. So it tries to make it a user-friendly report that you could pass off to your client, whoever that is, without too much massaging.
I want to say thank you to you because for Hindsight, I know when Jad and I did the research on the Chrome browser, on the Chrome browser for Chromebook, we found some additional locations for data and asked you to add those, and you added them like that. So just thank you for doing that because it was Chrome browser stuff just on a different platform, so the locations were different, and then it parsed it like so simple. So it was a nice addition to have for people to use who are doing that. And Chromebooks are definitely not something that typically you're going to see necessarily in IR investigations, but they're very common now for school resource officers to see them, for law enforcement to see them. And I would say thank you for that because a lot more people are seeing Chromebooks right now with all of this virtual learning environments.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. I'm happy to, yeah, if people want to, that's the other thing about open source is I think a lot of people might assume that the authors know a lot how their tools are being used or feedback or things like that, and that's actually pretty rare. So having people actually tell you how they're using it, what works, what doesn't, that's also really great feedback. Or feature requests, like I'm happy to add things that people think are useful because I mean I'm filtered by myself, right? I add what I think would be helpful, but I don't know what everybody else thinks is helpful.
I think that's important for people to realize about the open source community that often those authors don't get enough feedback. So feel free to share here, but also feel free to share with Ryan directly. I'm sure he'd love a message letting him know how you're using Hindsight in your investigations. Kevin says he can't wait for the adoption of Edge Chromium to be more prevalent, so that all he needs is Hindsight for browser forensics.
Working on it. Or they apparently. But
well, the move towards Chromium has made things way easier because I mean we see it in Axiom as well that things that we've already built now just work as more browsers adopt Chromium, and it actually makes it really easier to maintain those. There's so much stuff that needs to be maintained, so it's actually nice that a lot of other browsers are moving to a Chromium. Anything else you're working on? I know you have some other projects.
Yeah, so I started this other thing late last year called Unfurl. So it's again like I've like we talked about. I've kind of done a wide range of things in forensics, but my kind of go-to like research like Happy Places browser and URL related things. And so looking at all these web browser stuff, like you find all these crazy long URLs, and I'm always like, can I get more value from that? Like, is there something else hidden inside there? Like this thing is so long, it's overflowing my Excel sheet. Like there must be some data in here. And so that's kind of always been in my head for a long time is just trying to figure out what else could be in a URL. And so that's kind of what Unfurl does. It's this tool that looks at just the URL, not like reaching out and doing enhancements and things like that. It just tries to look at the actual string that's the URL and pull out all the information it can inside it. And so one of the things that I found with that is basically there's lots of ID schemes that websites and platforms and et cetera use. And a lot of those IDs are based off, things. They're not just random sometimes. And so finding the stuff that's embedded in them can be very interesting. And the same thing with Google searches. Like if you're looking at a long URL that might have some weird stuff in it, like I think Google searches are probably your first thought because they're so common. and they are so big, and there is a lot of cool stuff in there. So Unfurl is this tool that I built to kind of visualize and extract, like change a URL from like this long string into like a graph of a bunch of different like components. And so it tried to also make it very modular, so you can write these parsers or plugins that kind of do a specific thing, and you can just drop a new plugin in and just keep adding new features. So it pulls out things like timestamps, parses a bunch of kinds of IDs. There's a lot of application-specific stuff like for Google or for Twitter or for Discord or email clients. There's lots of things like that.
So I love it because it's an area that's not being well researched. And I would say one of the things I like that you do is that not only do you include it in your parser, but you also make a blog, which allows people to have a reference to be able to go through and understand it. But also if they're bringing it to court, they can reference that blog. Thank you for submitting one of your blogs through the DFIR review so that it was reviewed. But I really enjoy that because you can get into the why, because it would be one thing if I drop, and only because it's your most recent post, and I've spent a lot of time on it because it went through DFIR review, and because we were talking about this post actually in my class last night at Mason. Like in this recent blog post, if you check out the Tinkering with TikTok timestamps, he goes through explaining how it's like the Twitter timestamps, and it's just really cool because it digs into how you take off the first 32 most significant bits, and then you transform them, and then you to decimal, and then you parse that into the timestamp. And it's just really neat to see that pattern and make sense of that. But then you ask questions. You show, well, what are the other 32 lower significant bits? What are they? And then you map them out, and there's some pattern there. And so they must mean something. We just don't know what they are yet. And that's exciting to me, like the fact that there's something else to go through. Kevin says that the blogs are so thorough and incredible that media history is on his list to look at next. And that's exactly it. They're so thorough. And the tool, all right, what I love about the tool is your tool is super visual. You can use it as a standalone or use it right in the browser. It's not something that you'd run every URL through. You just drop a specific URL through that you're looking at. And it is the way that it digests everything. And then you'll look at something and you'll be like, what does this parameter mean that's being parsed out? And you can hover over it and get some context, or you can look for the blog on it. And the way you can zoom in and out, especially I've looked at some URLs that are ginormous, like they just go on forever. And I like that you can zoom in and out on the unfurl graph. Like it's just really easy to use. And it's exactly for that. It's when you deep dive. So if you're looking in your forensics tool and you come to that search query of interest and you're trying to figure out how long did this person spend on this page, you might be able to get that from Unfurl in seconds. And I might have asked that question on the Magnet Virtual Summit CTF to encourage people to go and find Unfurl and use it, because it's really for that digging in. And it's just phenomenal. And your research in that area is really cool. And the community appreciates it. So thank you for what you do in terms of all that deep browser history analysis.
And with Unfurl, like you kind of alluded to, it's nice to have the blog posts, I guess, that go along with explaining how the artifacts work. But I built Unfurl to be really modular with all these kind of generic parsers, and like you could go from an artifact you really well understand. Like you could easily write a parser that goes from this URL to here's the answer. But I like to have all those generic parsers in there, so you as an analyst that's looking at it, like I'm hoping like the building block kind of approach can actually help the analyst learn about the URLs as they go through it, not just like, here's the answer.
Yes.
It shows the steps, so hopefully you can understand it better, because if it is of any significance to your case, you might have to explain it to somebody else down the line. So yes, you can actually understand what Unfurl is showing you and then like really internalize that. And then you can actually explain it to somebody else. Then like you have a better grasp of it and it should help your overall case.
And 100% that visual representation, you go from the long string and you break it into blocks, and then you break each block into its parts, into sub-blocks, so that you can see that breakdown. And visually, if you're a visual examiner, it really helps you understand it. And then you can pick apart. And just like you said, it helps you be able to explain it better if that's really the critical evidence. And it's the kind of tool that you're not going to look at every URL with, you're going to look at the things of significance with. So you do want to understand it, because if you're digging that deep, it's probably something important to your case. You need to understand it.
Yeah, it's been a challenge for me to kind of like, because I had this idea for Unfurl and I kind of built it how I thought it should be built and for like my use case, but it's been hard for me to explain because yeah, a lot of people say like, oh, it's really cool. Let's build it in to make every single URL we have go through this as a pipeline and blah blah. And like, you could, but yeah, it's just hard to that. Yeah, like I see it more of this deep dive tool for one-off URLs that really matter, not using it in mass. But I mean, again, that's just my perspective. If somebody can find a really cool way to use it in mass, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, and really that time on a page is sometimes maybe something that's relevant. So maybe I want to search by things that maybe I want to see everything parsed out to that. And I know that not every single browser result is going to have that. It's not a common parameter, but maybe I want to search by things that I know that the person spent a lot of time looking at. They didn't just click. They spent time on this page. Maybe that's of interest. I don't know. I'm trying to think outside the box of ways that people would want all that content.
Other ideas that I have that are kind of more for like device profiling or trying to tell like a user, like, because one of the attributes you might see a lot is something describing like the screen size or the resolution. So maybe like you don't care about the actual searches or the actual pages, but maybe over time you see like their screen is always this size. Like maybe it's taller than it is wide. Maybe it's a phone, or maybe it's like you can describe what kind of computer it is. So yeah, there's definitely use cases for that, but they're still.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting. I love it. I think it's fascinating. So you make these amazing resources that people are using to look at their Google queries. What's your go-to resource?
I mean, Google, right? That's the correct one.
I mean, is that? Do you have to say that because
Google's in a contract somewhere?
Your employer.
I'm joking. No, so I've built and probably embarrassingly complicated RSS system for tracking all kinds of great blogs and websites and things like that. Right, there's a lot of great stuff in our community. I've been like curating this thing for years, basically trying to I have all this big complicated folder system and filters and rules and highlights and all this kinds of stuff. And I probably half the articles I read, I PDF them and have them in a folder and where I can search them. So again, it's like I do my own. If I have something that I think might be interesting later on, or I think it's really nice, really written article, or really well done or something, I'll save it off, because you never know when things will disappear kind of on the internet. And so I search kind of my little cache of things first for any kind of terms or browser organizational thing. Then I can go back to my RSS feeds and search for those later again, or just search, the normal Google for resources, right? For trying to find different bits of knowledge on things. That's actually where my DFIR.blog domain came from. Like my blog was on Obsidian Forensics for a long time. And like, I thought it was a really cool word and it was like unique and stuff like that. But I also over time realized like, that's kind of hard to spell. And so people would typo it or it'd be hard to, And so I bought DFIR.blog. So I was going to make something to like be like an RSS aggregator and show you all the forensic blogs. So kind of something similar to what Phil did with This Week in Forensics, but slightly different. But ideas are cheap and execution is hard. So props to him for doing it.
Phil spends a lot of time on that every week.
Yeah,
like exactly. I talk to Phil pretty regularly, and that is a big time sink for him, but he does it for the community, and I think it's fantastic. Is this what informs your daily DFIR? We didn't yet talk about your daily DFIR.
So that started off as I was going to just talk about unfurl things one a day for a year. And then my wife convinced me that might be a bit much. So I brought it up into just daily DFIR, which was a very good call. I kind of had different themes in the beginning. Like the beginning was kind of URLs and unfurl. Then I kind of switched to different browser things. And now I kind of have a pretty grab bag mix of different things about forensics that I talk about. His site is definitely really helpful for looking at different things that are happening kind of in forensics. I use it, like I still use all of my feeds to kind of look at the blogs directly, but his site is also great he has a different viewpoint on finding things, right? So I've added many blogs on before I have, so that's also been great.
So that's the reason it's important to have many things. I'd love to see what you've got coming in terms of what you've curated for your RSS feeds and your folders and everything, but that's also because I would love to see like how you structure and organize that, but that's just me being a little meta there. But I think it's brilliant that you have all that coming in, and I like the fact that you share that nugget. I really like Daily DFIR because it's just a little nugget. It's a little golden nugget every day. It's the same reason I kind of like Kevin Ripa's 3-Minute Max. Right? Mm-hmm. Because it's this small, very digestible, you can take it in each day, regardless of where your time is. And I like that. And you're sharing something that you think is relevant, and then people can choose whether or not they dig further into said thing. You always share a link or tidbit.
It's amazing because I also can't gauge reactions very well, or like I think I will, like I'm like, oh, this one's gonna be awesome, and then it'll get like crickets, and then I'll put something out that I'm like, okay, this is like everybody knows this, and then it'll get like a lot of attention, so it's hard to predict.
Well, you've also got to realize that not everyone is sitting from your same perspective. So it's great that you do share that variety of things that you think are unique and of interest, as well as things that you might think are more common knowledge base, because we have people at all different levels in the field at all time consuming this content, and so it's great to have that variety for that variety of the audience. I love it. I love it.
I guess the other resource that I have is pretty particular to me. But so like the when I've been working on hindsight, right? So one of the things that I do is I try and differentiate between every version of Chrome, like just based off different things it has kind of in the databases. So you don't have to tell, oh, this is Chrome 86 or Chrome 45 or whatever. And so as part of that, I have had this ritual I've been doing for I don't know how long time, where every 6 weeks when a new Chrome release comes out, I have this whole thing where I spin up a Windows VM, I install the latest version of Chrome, I go through this set script of user actions. Not script like scripting, but script like movie script.
Yeah, like script like
actions,
when you're writing out the actions you're going to take. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm generating this user data that I know of, right? That's very important for all these people creating test images. Like know what's in there.
Know what's known. Yeah.
And so I have this, and I have that for every single version of Chrome, and I have it saved off in all this kind of structured and archived. And I have all these scripts that I run across it, and I refer back to that constantly. What I'm looking for, oh, when did this artifact appear, or when did this change? Actually, I expose a lot of this on dfir.blog/Chrome-evolution. So there's another visualization where it's this kind of collapsible tree where you can see all the different files that make up your Chrome browser, and you can change the different Chrome versions and see how it changes. Like you can see when some kind of particular database appeared or disappeared, or the structure of a SQLite table changed. So that's one of the things I use. And
I love that.
Something similar for Unfurl, where I have just from a bunch of different places, I'm just collecting all these different URLs that I can then search in mass. Like, okay, how popular is this kind of parameter, or how common is this thing on a URL? So I'd say build your own resources that are helpful for you, and over time they'll pay off.
I love that, because what you've done is you've curated these data sets, both the RSS feeds and what you've done in terms of this Chrome data set is curated. And I love the fact that you're using the same routine every single time. When a new feature is added that you didn't previously test, do you update that script to include that?
Yeah, it's pretty vague. I mean, not vague. It's pretty small changes. Like I forget which version of Chrome it was, but like one of my things is to like open Google search and search for something. So it's like, in my initial script all those years ago, I tried to like hit a bunch of common websites. Obviously, I didn't hit websites that didn't exist back then. But like on the Google search now, when you pop it up, it asks you, it wants to know your location. So like in whatever version that my script updated, it's like, all right, say yes, because I want all our artifacts.
Okay, yeah, so that's exactly the same. I love it.
Update it to include the new features. Yeah,
I love it, and it allows you to quickly and easily diff it, and I think that's great. Really, really cool. I like that. I like that you have the data set. I have a feeling that now people know that. People are going to come up with some weird thing they have in data now, and you're going to be the go-to person who they're going to be like, hey, I don't see this, and I don't know if this was messed with. Does Chromium 49 have? So just wait. You just opened the can of worms. But it sounds like people can do this on that specific site, too. They can self-explore it, some of it.
Yeah, a lot of it. I mean, there's caveats, right? Like maybe not every artifact will be there, right? Like
Absolutely.
I didn't install certain things or whatever, but yeah, definitely.
I love that. So you've got all this experience across all these different sectors. Could you share a story from your experience in the field?
Yeah, so like one of the things, and obviously it's going to be, not obviously, but it's going to be Chrome related, surprise, surprise. But one of these cases, I even forget where it was, but it was one of the things that hindsight parses out for you is like the main tab is like the timeline, right, which tells you all the stuff. That's where most things that matter is. But it also parses out what every extension they have installed is. And so one of them, and basically I look through that every time because you never know what's going to be there. Like most of the time it's pretty standard stuff, but sometimes something might catch your eye. And one time I was looking through it, and it was I forget the name of it, but it was some kind of tab manager extension, and it said like make them look prettier or something like that. And it had a little tagline like it tracks all your tabs, even in incognito. And I was like, how. That's a
Ooh.
feature. And so this is a case, I think, where somebody cleared their history and people were interested in what they had done when they cleared their history. And so I went through and I dug through the extension and actually found that it was keeping its own kind of like shadow history file of all the stuff the person had done, even in incognito, because that's what the extension did. And so looking at all the data, kind of being complete, digging through the things. And so with hindsight, there's a plugin-based system, so you can again, kind of like on Perl, where you can do a little individual small thing. I just wrote a plugin that read the file from the extension and then piped it back in as internet history into hindsight, and then so it just parsed out the same way as everything else, and all other same kind of things applied. But yeah, so it pulled out their deleted internet history because their extension was helpfully saving it. Helpful for me, not helpful for them. But there was there's lots of good stuff in extensions. I'd say don't overlook them.
So I've used extensions a lot in the Chromebook research I've done. So I feel like we've been doing kind of parallel things because there's so much in Chromebooks, and Chromebooks use extensions extensively, and so much good data is in there, and there are extensions that can be used for vault apps. And so I've done some analysis on those and how to find the data, and similarly found shadow histories being done by some of the extensions. So I've seen that in some of my research, and know that extensions can do a variety of things. They're not just about putting a news feed in your URL bar, right? Like there's a lot that extensions can do. So I agree 100%, really important artifact sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. When it's important, it's important. I guess that's the right way to say it.
And there's another thing, like people look at URL, people think of browser history and think of URLs, right? URLs people visited, and that is probably the main thing. One of the areas I've been poking at for quite a while is just the other storage things that websites can use, like local storage or file system storage or IndexedDB. So hindsight does some stuff there. It's not perfect. I'm trying to add more and more because it's complicated and things keep changing, but there's a lot of really good stuff in there that can also help your case because you don't know what else might be hidden in there.
So I don't know if you've looked at it, but there is some really cool stuff happening in the web history that's stored by Google Takeouts that's different than the web history that's stored on device. And some of that particularly has to do with it. It gives you some other information in terms of storage, downloads, where things have gone. So if you haven't checked out, I don't know if you have, but if you haven't started looking at the web history stuff in Takeouts, Tara and Milton and I did a presentation comparing Takeouts, the data you get from Android on device, and we really dug into the web history, and we found a lot of differences in terms of the way that data is presented, and a lot of times we were able to see the storage routes in the Takeout that we weren't able to see on device, and it informed us and told us where to then look on the device in our test data. So that might be a neat area for you to check out, because it is some cool Chrome history stuff that's being stored by Google in a different way than it is being stored on device. So it's pretty neat. It got me excited. It seems like something that would be up your alley. So.
Right up my alley. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about Google histories and web history and the types of things you've been researching in your past history. What makes you tick outside of forensics?
I like to get outside whenever I can, which with all the smoke in California was painful for a while. But yeah, so I grew up, my dad was, besides his regular job, he was like a director of a volunteer kind of camp for like taking boys outside and doing things like that. So we did a bunch of they did a whole gamut of outside kind of stuff, like mountain biking, rock climbing, like hiking, sailing, like whitewater canoeing, scuba diving, like all kinds of different stuff. And so I would just, when I was little, I would tag along with him on those things. And then when I was old enough to actually attend, like as a camper, like I would attend. And then when I was old enough to be like a counselor, I would do that too. So I grew up doing that kind of stuff pretty much every summer. So that was really fun. After a while, a bunch of people kind of left that camp and went to a different company doing whitewater rafting. And so that was my college job. I was a whitewater rafter during the summer. So again, a little different than computers.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I like to do that whenever I can, which isn't as much anymore. So, but yeah, I still like to do outside stuff. I have a 3-year-old, so now I also do a lot of digging with, trucks in the backyard and building Legos and things. So my interests have shifted a little bit. Yeah, it's definitely not computer related. So. Yeah.
I love it. I love that you're getting outdoors, which is and moving your body, which is so different than what we do when we sit behind screens. I love it. you named a bunch of things that I love to do that I don't do enough. Like, to be honest, whitewater rafting is one of the things I do when I go on vacation. Like, I've gone whitewater rafting in Tennessee and loved it, or kayaking. Like, I've gone kayaking in on the Bahamas and stuff and loved it. But it's nothing that I do regularly. It's kind of like that thing that I only get to do when I go on vacation. So I love that you're doing that. It's like regular interactive, because it can bring so much joy and getting your body moving and being out in the air, and that's really, really cool. I love that you do it, and you get to do it with your little one in a couple years, right?
Yeah,
if your little one gets bigger, a little bit bigger
on a lake, on a flat lake this summer.
Awesome.
Right now, yeah.
I love that. So my other question I like to always ask everyone is, we have a lot of people who join the show who are looking to either get into forensics or move within the career. And what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's looking to get into forensics?
So yeah, again, my advice is going to be colored by my own experience, right? So it's
absolutely
kind of things that I did, but I would say pick something in forensics that interests you and kind of try and learn about it, like go deep on it. Like I happened to pick this new web browser, which worked out. Like, I think, so not everyone's going to find something like Chrome, but whatever it is, if you kind of become like an expert on that particular part of it, or even not an expert, just become very knowledgeable about it. I find it easier to learn about things when I'm interested, right? Versus like some abstract textbook thing where it's a bunch of variables that it's all theoretical, versus like, actually, I can figure out how this happened on this device and this thing. Like, I find that more engaging, and so I learn kind of faster and better that way. And the other thing is not just to learn about it, but to practice writing about it. Like, whether you write it just for yourself or for other people, I would encourage you to write it, because that's a skill that's going to be with you your entire career. Kind of like, it doesn't, like, when I'm thinking about a tool, I'm going a little tangent here. When I'm making a tool, like, it doesn't matter how cool my Chrome parsing stuff is if my end user doesn't understand what I'm telling them, right?
Yes. Yes.
Same thing goes for you, right? If you're the person that uses the tool or does the analysis, it doesn't matter how cool your analysis was. If your end user, whoever requested the report from you, can't understand your cool finding, right? So being able to write and communicate at the level of the person you're talking to make sure you're being understood, and like from the tool developer to the analyst, and analyst to the reporter or the requester, those are both two-way streets, like, right? You can't force somebody to, but you can make things easier or harder, right? So I think that's being able to practice your good communication is a really good thing. And I think it's especially important for those that are just getting started. Like, I kept a lot of my work outside of my job, which I know not everybody can do for time constraints. Mm-hmm. Having a public portfolio of the stuff you've done is really helpful as an employer. Like, I interview a lot of people because I have Google now, and if they have a blog or something, I'll definitely check it out. And you can tell how they write and have their level of analysis. Like, you can tell a lot more by reading through a blog post. That they can spend as much time as they want on writing, right? Versus an interview. Like, as someone trying to get I would definitely encourage you to write some really good stuff. If you're into coding, write some code too. If you're not everybody has to be a coder for this kind of field, but if you are, again, publishing that on GitHub or something, so again, people can look at it and see it and be impressed by it, I think is a really good way to get a job.
So there are so many things you mentioned there that I think are so critical and such great advice. Number one, I love the fact that you said to pick something that interests you and go deep on that, and that it's much easier and much more palatable to do work when it's something that you enjoy, instead of it being kind of esoteric. And I think that really applies to forensics as a whole, because we're investigating something, and that something we're investigating gives a story to the deep analytical work we're doing. If we were doing the same deep analytical work without, and some people do, but as a field as a whole, without that contextual of it is for this purpose, to find this malware, to figure out what happened on this system, to see if this person committed this crime, to find evidence related to something at this place. We usually have something that we're looking for, and that context helps us go deep, because we're vested in what we're supposed to be doing. And so I love this concept about finding something, and you are like the epitome of the example that's that I think folks who are new to the field should be following, to be honest, in terms of the fact that you found something, you went deep, you shared it, and you hit on something key. Not only did you bring tools to the foreground, but you also brought the deep technical explanation. And I love the fact that you're encouraging people to write. I remember my first job interview in the field, and I think I've spoken about this. And they, at the end of the interview, they handed me a stapler and a piece of paper and a pen. And they said, write a descriptive and a functional paragraph explaining this thing. And they wouldn't even identify that it was a stapler. It was blatantly a stapler. But they wanted me to show my writing style and how I could explain, both describe something and explain it functionally of an ordinary item. And it's funny because in college I had to do this for an item. I had to write a tech manual on something, and I did it on fingernail clippers, but it had to include all 5 aspects: repair, maintenance, description, function. I forget what the 5th one was, but I had to go through all 5 categories. And I remember doing that in university when I was struck with this thing. And I remember thinking, OMG, this is the biggest BS thing that I have to do at this moment. But in retrospect, I realized how valuable it was in their assessment of if I was capable of explaining something, even if it's not highly technical, right? Your ability to take something that isn't highly technical and give a technical explanation for it is something we have to do in this field. So as much as I hated it in that moment on the interview, I succeeded. I got the job. That's how I wound up in forensics. That's not the whole story, but that little thing, I love that. And I, like you, when I've interviewed people for positions, remember, OSINT works both ways, right? They're going to look at you and try to learn as much about the interviewer and the company, but you're also going to look at them. And man, I have such a clear picture when I know stuff they've done. I love that you brought that up. It also guides your questions, right?
Yeah, I do laugh when somebody says, "Oh, hindsight." I'm like, "That's my favorite tool." I'm like, "Really?" Good job doing some OSINT.
But the point is that then you can ask them questions about something they know. So you actually make your own interview easier if you've published work, because they're going to ask you.
I'll totally direct the questions at that, because I want to go as deep as you can on something. And so if you can prove you can do it on one topic, then this version you can do it on a different topic too later.
Exactly. So you're kind of writing your own interview if you produce stuff that way, and you're making sure that you're not going to get hit on something you forgot when you're getting asked general forensics knowledge trivia or how to do something, because you're guiding the discussion to something you've already spent time and passion on. You're setting yourself up for success, not just in the fact that you're oh, this person can write. Oh, they've done research on their own into areas that interest them. These are all things that let you know how capable they are. If you have 2 candidates and they both went to the same school and they both got great grades and it's their initial job out of school, and one of them has published research and it's technical and in depth, and you can understand the way their brain works, they've already got an edge. Not that you have to do it, but the other guy or gal might get asked questions that they don't necessarily have that deep familiarity with, whereas the other person's going to be able to go deep and really show themselves off better. So it's just brilliant advice. I think it really helps people. I really like the point there that you said about making tools, that it doesn't matter how cool it is if the end user doesn't understand it. I think a lot of times we script for ourselves and we don't think about the end audience, and we make something that we can consume easily, but maybe other people can't. And something that you particularly are really brilliant about is keeping that in mind and providing things in ways that others can easily digest, but also that whole documentation that goes along so people can deep dive it. It's absolutely critical to that fit. And I really hope that people take your advice who are looking for things and are doing that. And I've got to compliment the field. I've got to be honest. I've been seeing a lot of folks who I know are transitioning or newer to the field who are taking these opportunities to write these blogs about artifacts they're finding and research they're doing. I've been seeing way more of it in the last maybe COVID has something to do with it, but I've been seeing more this year than I have in the past, and it's so encouraging to the field, and it's growing those RSS feeds you've got to watch that Phil watches. But it's great. I love that people have been doing that, and I really hope that hearing you say it and your why behind it really clicks and resonates with people, because so much of what we do is all about the why. And I think sometimes we give advice to people who are new to the field, but we don't really color that why. And you just did that brilliantly.
on the like people understanding the work, right, or understanding your output, or even from understanding your tools better. Another tool we work on at Google a lot is called TimeSketch. And so it's this way to, because I think most people are familiar with Plaza or Log to Timeline, right? You take an image and you get all the timestamps out of it. But that produces this big thing that you have to then try and make sense of. And there's been a lot of people that tried their own hand at making their own version of like a Excel template or whatever it is to make that art that better or easier to understand. And so TimeSketch it's an Elasticsearch based system where it's a web interface where you can review all your timeline data. And we're doing a lot of work on it now with like visualizations and analyzers that kind of take your data and take it one step further. And you can do lots of things with Python to pull data out of there and then do your own visualization and put it back in there. And so it's a way to kind of process all this big timeline data you have, because it's like, yeah, I got 6 million events from this. And then you're like, I don't know where to start. So having that be able to accessible and easily click through it and kind of see things in an interface is nice. And so I'd say, yeah, we also can take in, we talk about it mostly from Plaza, right? Like you put Plaza output into TimeSketch. Anything that's timestamp based, if it has a particular couple of fields, rightly. So like you can go from Hindsight to TimeSketch also if you want. And so the same kind of thing, any kind of timeline data you can put in this tool.
What's the input for TimeSketch? What format is it? CSV? Is it JSON? Or what's it looking for?
A bunch of different types, CSV or JSON-L, so like one line, or like a SQLite from a Plaza file. There's a lot of different ways, or you can do it through Python. You can upload like a pandas data frame straight to it if you have some right columns.
So that's actually really cool, because then you could do something like take data from a tool like Axiom and look at it and view it in TimeSketch, because you can do all those basic exports and it accepts them.
Yeah, exactly. It's helpful for, you can also, it's designed for collaborative timeline analysis. So you have multiple people on your team. You can like leave comments and star items and kind of write notes.
Oh, interesting. And it's in a web interface then?
Yeah.
Is that very cool? Very cool. Are you going to be talking about that anytime soon?
Yeah, there's OSDFCon. I think Google is a sponsor, so I think we're doing a webinar ahead of time, or I think it's ahead of time. I'm not going to get the schedules up yet, but we'll talk about how to use TimeSketch to look at the data from, I think we're going to solve one of those open source challenges that someone else put out there, and talk about how to get the data into TimeSketch and then how to analyze it using Colab, which is kind of like an IPython notebook, kind of like Jupyter. To do, like I wrote something for the Magnet User Summit 2019 CTF, the same kind of thing. Using Python and TimeSketch to pull data in, like process it, pull it out, and then do some Python to get the answers for all the questions. So yeah, something similar to that, but for this new kind of data.
The 2019 CTF was fun because that was the one that had lots of, it's one of many that was Simpsons based. So it was really fun if you digged into the data and learned all about Samo Bouvier. And thank you, David Cowan and Matt Thayer, who were the collaborators on that. I do remember your write-ups on that. I thought that was really, really, really cool. I do like the fact that you're using one of these open source challenges to demonstrate how to use it, because it means after people see that presentation, they can try to replicate that. And I think that's always useful when people have that exposure where they can get hands-on with something that they know what the expectation is, instead of not knowing if they understand the results. So Kevin said that was a good CTF. Glad you enjoyed it, Kevin. But I really like that concept that you're using one of those open source challenges to do it. And, for anyone who's listening, OSDFCon is coming up. I believe it's November 18th, and it's free online. And something actually you and I were talking about before is just how awesome it is, how much content there is right now that's free and available to people, and what a great resource that is for the community. So I encourage everyone to take advantage of these opportunities for free learning and free networking, right? Like I will definitely be at OSDFCon, mainly because I'm really interested in the content, but I haven't missed an OSDFCon in many years. It's one of those staples to me because there's always great information I can use now. That's one of the great things about open source tools, right?
I'm hoping all the conferences come back to, when in-person attendance. I hope they go to kind of hybrid where they have the online at the same time as the in-person kind of attendance, because I think, for the SANS Summit, when I talked about Unfurl, I talked about.
You talked about Unfurl last, yeah. We shared that link, everyone, if you need that.
I don't know, tens of thousands of people that are attending it versus like in person, it's like
250,
hundreds maybe.
Yeah.
It's so many more people can get exposed to all that stuff, and so that's great. I think a lot more people lowering the barriers to kind of knowledge sharing.
I think you're right. And it's removing barriers that we don't think of, because sometimes we get hung up that we're in these professional circles, but it's removing barriers for students. It's removing barriers for people who are in geolocation isolated areas where maybe a lot of conferences don't go. It's removing barriers for people who have economic differences. It's removing barriers for people who are new to the field. And I would say, if you are attending conferences that way, consider the networking opportunities that are being given via Discord and Twitter and everything else. Talk to other people about the content you're seeing and develop those relationships. That'll also help you. And I think people are kind of missing that relationship development, but I'm seeing it in these other places. You just have to participate. And I know that kind of takes a different push than it does when you're in person, and naturally there's conversation, but I would encourage that push, because I know that I've been meeting people doing CTFs, and I've been meeting people I didn't know, going ahead and being at conferences, and having chats with them about the content. So don't think that that element is gone. It's just different. And now I know a lot of people only by screen names. I feel like I have relationships with, but they're just screen names.
And on that, like, even if you're a more reserved person, like I'm pretty reserved in person, it can be hard to go talk to somebody about something new or whatever. Just like, oh, I want to make a network connection with you. Like, that's a very awkward conversation. But if you have so they did a talk, or there's a topic, like there's a starter, right, about some technical deep quick thing that you can like talk to them about that on. That's an easier way to start a relationship with somebody who's talking about a technical thing. If that's hard for you, like it's hard for me to talk to people about just like networking, right? That's not my cup of tea.
I don't think that, to be honest, I don't think that it's a thing just to talk to people about networking. And I say that as somebody who is a little bit more social. I like to start a conversation about something I heard in your talk, or about something I know you're researching, or about something a challenge we're both trying to solve in a CTF. I think that those starting points are critical, because that's where you find common interest, and that's where you actually start. I mean, to be honest, the thing I'm missing is the collaboration that leads to new research. Because usually at those conferences is when I meet people, they do something, some idea spurns in me, oh, wouldn't it be neat if, and then you talk to them, and then you wind up collaborating, and the next year you're sharing data together at that same conference, right? To me, that's such a natural evolution that I feel is missing. And so please try to have those conversations in Discord, in Slack, whatever that medium is, because I don't want the field to lose that collaboration and that next set of research that I feel like is being a little bit has the potential to be stunted this year because of this environment. So I hope people take advantage of that. But you're right. I spoke at the DFIR summit as well, and I don't think I've ever spoken to 10,000 people at once before about a topic. And I got to talk about memory forensics, and that was a really cool, different experience, right? So yeah, I think it's good, and I appreciate the feedback. As someone who's involved in several conferences, from DFRWS to obviously the Magnet Virtual Summit conferences, and helps out in quite a few, that hybrid for the future is important. So I really appreciate that feedback. It means a lot. Thank you so much for being our guest today. You are incredible. Always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope that next time it'll be in sunny California without fires. And that we'll be able to have a lovely, lovely time. Thank you so much. Next week, we're keeping on the Google West Coast trend. Rob Duhart will be our guest. And then the rest of the schedule, if you're interested, it's up for the entire year till the end of December. We're actually scheduled past that. But if you go to magnetforensics/cash-up, you'll see the entire schedule for the rest of 2020, plus links to the RSS feed and a playlist to see previous episodes. After Rob, the following weeks, great lineup for the rest of the year. Geraldine Blay, Brian Moran, Lenita Hinch, Aaron Sparling, Catherine Headley, Richard Davis, Mary Ellen Kennel, Kim Bradley. I'm just excited to talk to everyone. I feel so fortunate to get to do so and to share this with you. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.